Morning, Jamie.
Good morning, Alison. So
hmm
today, now that Sweetie and Lou have left Hutchinson, Kansas,
Yeah.
and we were only there for a short time,
hmm
I definitely have questions
Yeah.
because of the naval base in Hutchinson.
hmm
And you were able to find out some information about Hutchinson, Kansas.
That's right. Yeah. Naval Air Station Hutchinson, I have to say, is very tricky to piece together the history. And I'm still working on some of it. So if you go to the website and you want some more details, more than what we'll say in this video today, go to the www.lovesweetiepodcast.com website. Actually, you know what? I could just bring it up on the screen here
Ooh, bring it on
so
up.
that we can actually see and we can demonstrate where to go. But I'll describe what's going on for our audio listeners just so you don't miss out on the information here. So, on the Love Sweetie Podcast website, which is www.lovesweetiepodcast.com, if you go to Sweetie's scrapbook, you'll see the different sections. In this case, you want to go to the section called the Family Tree Timeline and Podcast Glossary, and you can either click the link or click Sweetie's photo, and it'll lead you to a new menu here, which includes the family trees. So if you've been confused about who people are and need to double check your information for these letters, or if you're joining new and you want to figure out who everybody is, you want to go and look at that. The timeline catches you up to where we are with the letters. But the glossary here, and same thing, you can either click the link or click the photo of the books. We have some basic information about major characters outside the family from the storyline, or places or items. Basically, things that are extremely relevant that I thought could require for any new listeners or any existing listeners as a reference just to go back to what it is. And this expands as the storyline goes on. Of course, we have like Ed and David Chase here. Hutchinson as a town is noted, but there's also the two naval air stations that we're used to, Ottumwa, and then we have Naval Air Station Hutchinson. And there's a little section here where it says more information about NAS Hutchinson is being compiled on this site here. You click the word here and it goes to a page about NAS Hutchinson, which is where some of the current histories that I've been working on is documented. So if you're looking for a little more beyond this particular video and want to read about some of the characters for NAS Hutchinson and the building of the base, go ahead and take a look at that page. And we'll go through some of this information in this video today. I've been able to basically use newspapers in 1942 to figure out some of the first staff at the base. And that kind of information is very, very difficult to track. Officers, not as much, but enlisted men, things like that. The Navy really didn't keep track of who was where with the training bases. We know this from Ottumwa in World War II. So it's very difficult to see who exactly is going back and forth. So it's nice to have some names, to actually have some names of some of like the medical staff, some of the first operators, some of the construction guys, and things like that. But that's where you can go for that information. So I welcome everybody to check that out on the website. But I did prepare a presentation today with some of the high-level information about NAS Hutchinson. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, Jamie, and bring this up. And I love this screen so much. There's a little acknowledgement here to Ottumwa, because the title that we have for our audio listeners, Naval Air Station, NAS Hutchinson, a carrier on the Prairie in Kansas during World War II. And I've put carrier on the Prairie in quotes, and that's in homage to the book Carrier on the Prairie, which is the book that is about NAS Ottumwa. So it's because they're sister bases. I thought it appropriate to say, here's a little sister information, little sister history going on for Kansas. And then for those who are listening to our audio channel and can't see this, I have to encourage you to go look at this on the website, and I will put this up on the website. We have a mascot for NAS Hutchinson, and we'll get into the story of how this happened. And I do have the story of how this happened to be the mascot. But for any Disney fans, we have Jiminy Cricket in a sailor suit hanging on for dear life in a trainer airplane with the sun peeking out from behind a cloud, looking quite concerned that Jiminy Cricket does not look that safe. This image, this Disney image, because Disney did a lot of film and images for the war effort during the 40s, this particular image is taken from a matchbook cover that I was able to find for NAS Hutchinson. So that's where this particular image for this presentation is taken from, is from an artifact, which is the matchbook cover. And then on the opposite side, we have the real logo of NAS Hutchinson, which I will put this on the website and I will bring up in another screen. We will get to see the government logo. The government logo for NAS Hutchinson is not Jiminy Cricket. Just to be very clear.
Well, why not? That's just wrong.
Yeah.
This is a beautiful logo.
It's
I'm
really
a little concerned, just like the sun.
Yeah.
But this is a really cool logo for the time.
Yeah. Yeah, we have our mascot. And also, I was just looking at this one more time. There's also an anchor attached to the plane, which probably not a good idea. So, but for the humor of this mascot of Jiminy Cricket looking quite concerned in the Stearman plane. This is not just like a random Navy Pinocchio image. This was specifically designed, and we'll get into how that happened, for Hutchinson. So, little connection between Walt Disney and Hutchinson, Kansas. So, moving into the next slide here, we're going to talk about some of the beginning of the base. Now, we learned that this was the sister station for NAS Ottumwa from Stephen Black. So if you didn't listen to our much more extensive interview, about the hour interview with Stephen Black, who is the president of the NAS Ottumwa Foundation, the group that's taking care of the old base there, he indicated quite clearly that Hutchinson was built as the sister station to Ottumwa. It's because, as he said, the government decided to build both of these bases simultaneously. So the plans are being set in motion to build these carriers on the prairie, using that term, in Iowa and in Kansas at the same time. And as a result, the plans are going to move forward in the same timeline. They're going to be very, very similar to each other. I think Ottumwa would have been a little bit bigger, but we do have a listing of, just from the newspaper articles, of just how many buildings were at this base. So by all means, this is not a small base. So construction begins in the base in 1942. We know this from the newspaper article that it would cost at least $10 million in 1942 to complete the construction of the base. So this is a major operation that they're building out here. We know also from the papers that there was an architect engineer firm which built the base called Black & Veatch, which is still in operation in Kansas today. It's a company back from 1915. So if any of our Kansas listeners are familiar with this company, they were the architect and engineers for Naval Air Station Hutchinson. And then the construction company was Kiewit Condon Construction Company, which I think is also still in business in the Midwest today. So for anybody that's listening that has an interest in Kansas and the histories of some of these older companies, it was nice to identify exactly, here's the cost, here's the design, and here's the company that did the building, which is really cool. All right. So the first guys arrive at NAS Hutchinson, and this is going to be in 1942. So the original plan was that there would be cadets from Athens, Georgia. Now, I've actually been to Athens, Georgia. Athens, Georgia is in like the north central portion of Georgia. It's like northeast of Atlanta. It's a really cool place because that has the place that the tree that owns itself is in Athens. Story for another time. There is a tree that owns its own freedom. It's in Athens, Georgia. So you're welcome to our Georgia listeners. But the Navy pre-flight cadets at the Navy pre-flight school in Athens, Georgia, it was thought that they would transfer in. That would be the first group of men into NAS Hutchinson. The first number are going to be 600 people. So it's going to start, pretty...
Fairly large, yeah. I mean, 600 people is not a small amount of people.
No, not for a city in Kansas, which the scale of the city in Kansas, we've seen from some other episodes, like those postcards of Hutchinson. Mm-hmm. The scale of Hutchinson is very comparative to Ottumwa. I think it was 29,000. So somewhere around that amount, whether that's during or after the base. But it's definitely an influx of people that without the war probably wouldn't have been seen all at one time. Of those 600, 300 are officers and 300 are enlisted men, which normally you'd have more enlisted men than officers in the base, but this is when it's getting started. So we have the officers there, as well as the families, right? We saw this with Sweetie, with the apartment hunting.
Yeah, exactly. When Sweetie was trying to find an apartment, they were all taken.
Yeah. And so September 1942. So if people were wondering when did the men start arriving at the base where there was enough built. Now this doesn't mean all the buildings were done in September 42. This means there's enough for basic operations to get going. So we can really say, even though it was approved earlier than this, there's enough built at this time where the base can start bringing the men in. And then they had to, of course, they have to increase housing in town because this is going to keep going on. So with these families and the men being about. All right. So the first planes at NAS Hutchinson, just a little bit of the terminology for the trainer planes that we have here, because especially if you go back and listen to the NAS Ottumwa episode, or if you go to the NAS Ottumwa website, which I'm going to keep referencing because that's where there's a lot of good history that's very applicable to Hutchinson here, because unfortunately the buildings do not survive for NAS Hutchinson. We can't really visit that, and the history is so scattered. The planes are really those steerman trainers. So we hear the term the steermans. So if you're kind of learning the World War II plane, and it's hard to identify because there's so many different types of planes, if you ever hear the steerman trainers, these are going to be those biplanes that are in use at Ottumwa and in Hutchinson. They had really two types at the base when it first started. They had the N2S-3, they call it the Cadet, so spelled Kaydet, and then there's the N2S-4, which is just a Navy version of the previous. So it's these standard steerman trainer biplanes. They had two seats, right? Because you're teaching the flight instructors. So you've got the student in front and you've got the instructor behind. So two-seater biplanes, which, there's tons of pictures of these online. I encourage people to go and look more into the planes. And a number of these survive from the time period. So if you ever go to like World War II air shows and things like that, and you're walking by and you see a steerman, that's what would have been at Hutchinson. Now, by the time we get to June 1943, there's 185 of these planes on the base. So you need a lot of space for there to be 185 planes on a base in Kansas. But it also speaks to the amount of training that they're doing. There's a need for 185 steerman trainers to be there. And this is in a very short amount of time. I mean, the first planes that come in are October 1942. So less than a year later, 185 are on the base.
It increased quickly.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
This was a very quick, and this is what Lou did, was work on planes, right?
Right. So
he would be, I wonder how many of the other cadets or how many of the other men that were stationed there had also never seen the ocean.
Oh, probably tons of them. And we have to set ourselves back to June 1943. This is well before D-Day, and all of the activities. Now, in the storyline where we are with the Sweetie story, the European war is coming close to the end, or at the end of World War II. But at the time that these planes, right, are here, they're still very much trying just to get into France. So they're training all of these guys. And then if we think back to NAS Ottumwa and talking about like the day-to-day with like night flights, if you remember from some of the stories that Lou gave and the things, like we can very much imagine that kind of scheduling and that kind of activity and the women being on the base, just like in Ottumwa, it would have been very similar in Hutchinson. So using the history of Ottumwa to kind of fill in the gaps of Hutchinson, we really get a good picture of what was happening in Kansas at the time. And this is the Not Pinocchio.
Oh.
The Not Pinocchio actual logo. And I was able to get this one from the other matchbook cover.
Oh.
From NAS. And I'll put this one on the
It's so funny that matchbook covers are what have survived.
It's great to see them. Matchbook cover, there's a huge collecting industry for matchbook covers. I did not know about this, but they're fun. If you go on like eBay and you look up matchbook covers from restaurants, from sort of retro things from your area, people are just collecting them because they just want to see the imagery. That's been lost.
I mean, it's small. It's easy to not only collect but store.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you know what I really like about this logo is we are so used to all of our states having two letters.
Yeah.
For to designate them. And here they have it KNS, cans.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cans, yeah.
You don't see that. This is at the point in time where, and even when Sweetie writes letters, sometimes it's PENNA for Pennsylvania.
Right. Yeah.
So that's neat.
Iowa, of course, short enough to just write Iowa.
So, yeah, Iowa's neat.
4 letters. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, in Hutchinson, they write it out. This logo is really nice for those listening to our audio. Again, look at the picture on the website. But we have a shield here with the anchor behind and wings extending out. Ottumwa, of course, had that great image of the map of Iowa with the wings and then the little like heart where Ottumwa is on the map, which is yeah, it's great. But yeah, we see the wings here because it's naval air, right? We get that flight indicator. No Jiminy Cricket here, certainly not.
No, this is a little more professional.
Yeah, a little more professional. Probably needs to be a little more professional. All right, so we talk about the first officers, some of the major names that I have found going through the histories. So this is the first commander at the base, Lieutenant Commander W.C. King. I've been trying to figure out what W.C. stands for. And please, because I have been looking for this, if you are in Hutchinson and you have a family member that knew Commander King and knows his first name, please email us. And I will update the site to give the actual name.
And we will give you credit. Person. You will get credit.
We'll give you credit, yeah. Identified by whomever identifies that. Now, it could be that King wasn't from the area and was only there at the time of the base, and that's very, very possible. But who knows? I'm not going to rule out the possibility that someone still alive today would actually know the commander's full name. The other officers, of course, begin arriving in September 1942 when all the other men are coming in. And then we have a flight instructor. Now, the flight instructors can be very notable at the base, and this one in particular is extremely notable for this base, and that's Lieutenant Wayne Morris. Now, he arrives in September 1942, so he's really one of the first instructors. And a lot of this presentation, we're going to talk about Morris, because it's going to lead back to the thing that I was first talking about. And this is a very unique history specific to Hutchinson. So, Lieutenant Wayne Morris, great headshot photo. Joe Graham would be very proud of
Joe Graham would be envious.
Headshot like this. He'd be totally envious of this. Morris was an actor from Hollywood. Yep.
Shut up. Really?
Yep. Lieutenant Wayne Morris was an actor from Los Angeles, California, from Hollywood, and he was in movies before the war. So he made a film debut in 1936 in the film China Clipper, and then in 1937 he was in a film called Kid Galahad. I believe he was the lead. So we'll get his picture up on the website as well so people can see the Lieutenant Morris. He filmed 1940s Flight Angels. So he does this movie called Flight Angels in 1940s. And because he does this movie, he gets interested in flight. And so as a result of that, he becomes a pilot. And when World War II starts, he joins the Naval Reserve and becomes a naval aviator. So,
well, now I want to point out the timeline here, because if in the 40s he did the Flight Angels, he arrived in 1942. So in 2 short years, he made such a name for himself.
Yep, that's it. He learns how to fly very quickly. He is doing this movie, 1940 Flight Angels, and falls in love with flying so much that he's at the point where he can teach others to fly 2 years later.
Unreal.
That's pretty impressive.
That is impressive.
Yeah.
I'm impressed.
But the other neat thing here about Lieutenant Morris is that he had to convince the Navy to let him fly because he was seen as too big to fit in the fighter planes. He had a connection, though. I mean, this is a Hollywood actor with his uncle-in-law, and he joins a fighter squadron called the McCampbell Heroes. So during the war, outside of just being an instructor at Hutchinson, he had 57 aerial sorties, like the fighter battles in the sky with other planes. He shoots down 7 Japanese aircraft, Zeros. He sinks an anti-aircraft gunboat and an escort vessel. This is what we've heard about. This is online. He helps sink a submarine, and he damages a heavy cruiser and a mine layer. So this is a very accomplished fighter pilot.
He is very accomplished.
Yeah.
I mean, especially given that he didn't even start flying until like the 40s.
Right. He did a movie in 1940, and then he becomes a flight instructor, and then he goes and serves, specifically in the Pacific, because they talk about the Zeros being the Japanese aircraft. So Zero, Zeros, exactly as it sounds, is the type of Japanese aircraft that he took down. And imagine, he was told by the Navy, you're too big to fly. Luckily, he had a connection, and look at what he's able to do.
Clearly he wasn't too big to fly.
No.
Clearly he was just the right size.
Documented online are his awards, which are a lot of awards. He has the Naval Aviator Badge, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal, the Navy Presidential Unit Citation, the American Defense Service Medal, the American Campaign Medal. We're going to see one of those soon, by the way. The Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, the World War II Victory Medal, We're going to see one of those soon, too. Armed Forces Reserve Medal, the Philippine Presidential Unit Citation, and the Philippine Liberation Medal. So he's highly, highly decorated throughout the war for what he's able to do. But he's going to do something for the people of Hutchinson because he had the connection to get into the fighter unit. He also has another connection. He's from Hollywood.
That's right.
So because he's from Hollywood, he is able to work his connections to talk to Walt Disney to create the Pinocchio mascot for NAS Hutchinson. So here's this famous actor using his famous connections saying, we should have a mascot. So he uses that and he suggests the design, and it was on the training planes. So we know that these were, like, can you imagine those Stearman planes? And then, like, Pinocchio's on the back of it, right? Like, well, not Pinocchio, Jiminy Cricket.
But Jiminy Cricket, yeah.
You know.
Like,
With
no,
not-
like, so, wow. So
Isn't that
this
great?
is amazing that all of this stuff happened at Hutchinson.
Yeah.
And yet we don't, the base is completely gone.
It's gone. Yeah. It's gone.
And it's amazing. Like we would have never, I would have never known this. There was nothing to like, but this is amazing. Right. And so this little guy, just like you see the pictures of, you see some other, maybe not so cute pictures on the sides of these planes, but like, so this little guy was on the planes at Hutchinson.
He was on the planes as the mascot at Hutchinson. So they couldn't use it, obviously, for official correspondence. They're going to use the other logo. But for things like very basic stationery, that's not official correspondence, for putting them on the planes, for matchbook covers.
Matchbooks.
Right, which is where we get the full color image. Because there's a lot of black and white images of this online, but I was happy that this matchbook cover survives. Because actually one of the newspaper articles described it as the moon coming out from behind the clouds, because in black and white you can't really tell. But from the matchbook cover, you know immediately it's the sun. So it actually clears up something that had been misstated even at the paper of the time. But everybody loves that story, right? Oh, look, Jiminy Cricket's on the plane. Hanging on for dear life, obviously, but on the plane, which is great. And we already described the mascot previously. So it's just something to appreciate that a guy uses his connection, who's already he's going to become, because during the later part of the war, obviously, he's becoming this instructor, but he's going to become extremely decorated. He also gives this back to the people in Hutchinson. All right, and then we can talk a little bit about the end of World War II and the post-war. So flight training is going to continue throughout Hutchinson's history, but in the latter half, the training aspect is going to start to basically cease. They're not going to really continue too much with Kansas. At this point, there's a lot of pilots already engaged in war, right? So a lot of these big training periods have ended. And this lines up actually with Sweetie's story, because it's by summer of 44 that Lou comes over, right? Fixing engines, working on things like that. And we know that Lou was aviation machinist mate, 3rd class, and he's getting his promotion there. So a lot of the work on the parts and things like that. The base does continue until October 1946. So it's in active operation, and then it stops. And I believe online there was discussion that some of the buildings start to be used by like the local farmers for like storage and things like that. And the buildings start to deteriorate at this point because there's no one there. Now, the Korean War starts. So then it becomes Hutchinson Air Force Station. So it switches over to the Air Force controlling it. And they had a radar site there. So they're going to be using that because it's already installed, pretty significantly there. And that's going to continue for a bit. And it's basically air traffic control work that's going on. The Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, is going to be using those radar systems there. But then they deactivate that, at least the air traffic control portion of it, in late 1968. On September 8th, 1968, and then it closes again. So at this point, any buildings that remain are just going to fall into disrepair or be left until the present day. So there's not an effort like Stephen Black and the guys at NAS Hutchinson that is going on in Hutchinson that saves, the administrative building or anything like that. The buildings that were there come down. And the spot where NAS Hutchinson was, so if you're from the area, if you know the Hutchinson Community College and the area vocational school, that's the location of the base, and then they put up new buildings. There is one thing that remains from the base, though. The Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, maintains and operate the former Air Force radars that were there. So there are, from what I saw online, there is Air Force active radar that's used by the FAA because it's probably such a significant installation to get that built You might as well, just keep monitoring.
Might as well just keep it, yeah. Makes
Right.
sense. If there was anything they were gonna keep.
Yeah.
But that is amazing that the entire base is, like, gone except for this radar, and now there's a community college there.
Now there's a community college there. Yeah, but if you imagine, like, just a moment in time, and this happens in a bunch of different wars. Some areas are going to be built up during wartime, and then it's going to slowly vanish as if it was never there. But while it was there, extremely, extremely active. We get the sense of the scale of how many, 185 trainer planes, how many training flights are they doing a day, and all of this going on in Hutchinson. So,
and where were they storing them?
Yeah, you have to build that. Now, that brings up a really good point here, and I can bring that up on the website and show you some of the work in progress that I've continued with on that NAS Hutchinson page from the Sweetie podcast. I was able, because I thought it was important to give sort of an idea. I was able, from the newspaper articles, I'll make my screen a little bigger here.
Oh, yeah.
To be able to identify, as the newspaper was reporting that things were being built, to document that they were built. So we know at minimum, here's the buildings that were there. We have the headquarters. And that was temporarily before everything was operational. They moved it to the state fairgrounds in October 42. It moves over to the base. We know that there's concrete runways, and the newspaper articles reported that they were 5,000 feet in length, and they were to be done by October 1942. So we have, for those planes coming in, 5,000-foot runways. They wanted to include a landing mat half a mile in diameter, made all of asphalt, so that would have been out there. Now that's still being built on, no doubt. You're not going to dig up all these runways and things.
No.
Yeah. 20 outlying fields were to be leased for use. So the farmers' fields around in the area. So they've got 20 major fields where there's going to be more that was there. There was the contractor's office building. Now, I like noting this because when Sweetie was in Ottumwa, she was working with the contractors. So there were probably some women and some other staff that were there. The infirmary.
And didn't she also try to get a job at the base? Try to talk to somebody at Hutchinson, and then she decided it wasn't going to work out. Yeah,
I'm good. Not again. Yeah. But in Ottumwa, she certainly did. So we know that they were talking to women. So we know women would have been employed there. We can glean from the stories what was going on. The infirmary implied as being operational as of September of 1942. Now, I was really happy to actually identify some of the medical staff from some of the early articles, and we can see that there were some women nurses there as the RNs, and in using the articles, identifying who they were. And then we have the pharmacist's mate. So that term of the mate being used in the official titles here, as much as could be figured out. I worked through those. So we do have the women nurses in the infirmary.
Are they including their maiden names? What is that?
Yes. In the papers, they did.
That's cool.
They did. Yeah. So maybe some individuals in Hutchinson, maybe you're related to these individuals who are working at the base. And if you were ever questioning, were they there? Slowly you can kind of go through the site as it's being updated and keep an eye on that. With the barracks, the sidewalls were prefabricated, had concrete footing. So we know there were the barracks, there were the mess halls, the warehouses, the sewage disposal plant on site for the base. That's always a good idea, is what you're going to do with everything else. And then things that were being planned as of fall 42, which I would have to suspect they did build. The gymnasium, the swimming pool, a bowling alley, a movie theater, and playing fields, which we know from Ottumwa, these were certainly built at Ottumwa. They were planned at Hutchinson. So I expect to see, as I continue to look at some of this history, that they were actually built. So we have all the recreational activities. So the scale looks comparable to Ottumwa for what they had there, which is really, really cool. If I scroll up on some of the other officers that were here, I love sometimes when I kind of get to see just some of the scattered officer titles we can see that were on the base. Now, Wayne Morris was technically junior grade. That was the flight instructor that got Pinocchio as the mascot. That was extremely decorated. But we also have things like mathematics instructors, and it also serves to give an idea of what people were studying when they were training there. Public relations, of course, legal matters. I love that the ship's cook was documented in the newspaper as arriving, and he had previously been serving the Navy for 30 years. So they had a pretty good cook in the mess hall at NAS Hutchinson, and his name was John William Dibble. And there's a quote from the paper there: Dibble will preside over the galley at the state fairgrounds where the Navy moves in after the fair. Kitchen equipment's coming in. So, hey, it's important to keep the men well fed. The men and the women well fed there. And then we actually get to see some information about one of the photographers that was there, as well as sort of the land buyers. So as these names come up, they're being documented there, but we get an idea just from who is there, just the extent of what was built in Hutchinson, which, of course, today the landscape's completely changed and it's all gone except for the radar, basically, except for the radar. But yeah, that's pretty much what I've been able to put together thus far from the papers, from some of the available online information, from some of the basic information. But I think it paints a very little picture of
it paints the picture that, you know, we don't have the buildings, we don't have somebody like Stephen Black coming in and like trying to preserve this history. So we have Alison. So Alison is going to help us get a better picture, like you said, of what was going on in Hutchinson at the time. And you know, it not being there anymore. Right. This is important work.
Yeah. And to any of our listeners from Kansas, any people from Hutchinson that can contribute some information, and if you'd like to see it on lovesweetiepodcast.com website on that page, by all means, you can email. There's the email address for the website, which is info@lovesweetiepodcast.com. I'll put it up on the screen so everybody can see it there, because some of the things, like, for example, with NAS Ottumwa, I kept wearing that Sweetie's button, you know, the badge, her badge from NAS Ottumwa. The things that you think, well, they have to already know about this thing, is really the kind of stuff that don't make any assumptions that people know things. Because I kept wearing that button and that badge, and I showed it to Stephen, and he said they have one men's badge from NAS Ottumwa in their collection, and they're trying to build up their collections. They'd never seen a women's badge before. For all we know, Sweetie's could be the only one. So I like having it on the website, because now we're filling in the history, but it's like a community effort to fill in the history. And the other thing is, any of the work that I do on NAS Hutchinson, I'm going to be sending those information and details over to Stephen Black, because NAS Ottumwa is also telling the story not just of Ottumwa, but of the Midwestern NAS bases as well. So at least Hutchinson can be a bit more potentially represented in the future, at least at the museum that's being built at its sister base there in Ottumwa. So
like NAS Ottumwa is like our flagship for the Midwest.
Absolutely. And it's the one that was saved. As he said, I've listened back to that interview. He's like, everything was still here. And they were able to save a lot of that administrative building. And they're doing well, you know, with what they're doing there. But it's nice to have that. So I think that's going to become like the central collecting point. If you have things related to NAS in the Midwest, and like especially larger donation items and things like that, it might be wise to get in contact with the people at Ottumwa and say this is specifically from the sister base in Hutchinson, because sometimes people don't know what to do with these items. That's the other thing. Like, instead of just throwing them away, it might be like the one thing that fills in the story. Like something as simple as a badge from Hutchinson, there might only be a few left, you know, for people.
There could be treasures in your attic.
Yep.
There could be like little things that you might not have thought about. And so hopefully this will waken up some people's attention to the things that maybe they saw when they were kids. Maybe maybe your grandparents showed you this. Maybe you heard a story. Maybe you got a box somewhere. Definitely. And I think that Alison is perfectly, I'm going to go ahead and say you should email. And I'm sure that she can point you in the right direction.
Yeah, I'll happily point people in the right direction. If we all work together, we can help fill in the gaps of this story for something that's very much gone today. So, but that's pretty much it. Just wanted to give some bonus content as we were just leaving the story, as we were just leaving the Kansas portion of the story, something to give back to the people of Kansas so that we have a little bit more information and some work that's being done to fill in some of the missing information there.
Well, in Hutchinson too, it was a small stop in Lou and Sweetie's life.
Yep.
And I think, but I'm really glad that we were able to get this together. Well, that Alison was able to get this together so that we could pay homage.
Yeah.
To Hutchinson, Kansas.
And say thank you to Kansas. All right. Bye, everyone.